Hi, and welcome back to Crash Test Gaming. This is Crash here. We are going today to have a look at Arms Trade Tycoon tanks. We are going to look at some tips and tricks to stop you from going bankrupt in the initial stages of the game. Unfortunately, the early stages of the game are proving to be quite tough for some of our viewers, and this video is here to help you get through the first couple of years. We're going to look at what buildings to build, some of the intricacies of tank design and how the game calculates how good your tank design is, and we'll have a look at the techs and which techs are good to aim for first. So let us get started. We'll do this example on medium difficulty. Okay, so company name. We shall go with the old ubiquitous Merchants of Death. So we're going to have a tutorial man pop up and tell us to be spending lots of money. You pretty much do not want to spend too much attention to him at all, because he's kind of going to make you go broke. The first contract seems to come in on a random number generator. So depending on your luck, you might be waiting quite a while for that first contract, which seems a bit weird, because who's going to start a company with a product like tanks without a customer? But in this game, that's what we're doing. We don't have a customer. We're aiming for the British government to be our customer, but they have not yet put down a tender for tanks. So we are going to start and look at what buildings are worth building at the start. That'll be our first point. For me, research is worth spending money on straight from the start. We get 1.2 million on medium difficulty. You'll notice that's increased. In the last patch, they added an extra couple of 100,000 to each of the starts on easy, medium, and hard difficulty. So that gives us a bit more wiggle room than we used to have. Now, for research, the ergonomics office is a no-brainer. We can fit 20 researchers at the start of the game. 20 engineers in our research office doing research. The ergonomics office lets us put another 10 in and costs us 5,000 a month. Maintenance cost is very important in this game. The building's maintenance is going to end up costing you so much more money than the actual build cost of 60,000. But this is a trade-off that's easily worth it. We are increasing our research rate from 20 men to 30 men, so that's a 50% increase. Goes without saying. Now, because I'm a nut that loves research, I would say that it's worthwhile building the structure lab, mobility lab, and firepower lab. They give you an extra 15% of research in and 10% for mobility and firepower. Across structure, basically, is a few more research points, so they've weighted that a bit more heavily. You see that matches up when we go to the research screen. Structure, firepower, mobility. So that gives us 15% on structure, so a discount of 15% on all our research there. 10% cheaper firepower research and 10% cheaper mobility research. Now, if we look at the other buildings in research, the fundamental labs, that just gives you 3% across the board. So it's not as good. Not as good. That gives us a total 9% across the board. We're going to be getting 10%, 10%, and 15%. So that's 11.3% average, I guess. So fundamental lab, not as good as the other options. Breakthrough lab, there's 60 techs in the original iteration of the game here. This is before the interwar period patch, and we get a 5% breakthrough chance, which is going to automatically give us straight through breakthrough. So that's 1 in 20 techs. So that's 3 techs for the entire game. We're likely to get a breakthrough. That's if we're average. Now, I'm always unlucky, so I would probably get 1, 2, or maybe 0. But if you're on the average, you'd get 3. That doesn't figure out 3 of 60 is smaller than 10%. So not as good. Material division, component division, and innovative design, these just don't affect as many techs as the Structure, Mobility and Firepower Lab. So they're about the same, 15%, 10% and 10%, but less effectiveness. So we're going to go with Structure, Mobility and Firepower. The Analytics division, I'm still not entirely sure how much this is all nodes. I haven't done a full playthrough with this built yet, but 10% is less than 11.3%. So we are going to build the Structure, Mobility and Firepower Lab. It's just mathematically a better choice for us. Now if we go to administration, medical stations, we have a chance in every building of having accidents, and when we have accidents, men die, unfortunately, in the production of tanks, or they get injured and can no longer work. So there is no point building this medical station unless you're constantly hiring and firing staff to minimize your costs, which is minimal return for a lot of busy work, and I believe it will eventually get patched out, because the game is meant to operate that when you fire people, they get paid out for the amount of time that they've been there. At the moment, the game only calculates wages on the 1st of every month. So if I fire someone on the 15th, I would pay him half a month's wages when he gets fired. Unfortunately, when you do fire someone, those half a month wages don't disappear. So you can save very small amounts of money by firing your workers before the 1st of the month and then rehiring them after the 1st of the month. But if we go into administration, you'll see we have a limitation on the amount of idle workers we have. So there is a limit on how many people you can fire and how many are available for hire. So we've only got 25 workers available for hire. So, I mean, we can take a maximum of 300. Whether it's worth firing some of our idle workers to save on wages and then we can only hire 25 back. Some players are that meticulous, they will do that. To me, it seems like a lot of busy work for very marginal gain, so it's not something I participate in. And so there's no need for me to have a medical station, because if I have an accident, as the number of workers accrues every month, I usually have enough workers that are immediately able to be hired to cover that medical situation. So I don't bother building the medical station. A must-have is the fire station. Fires are fairly debilitating just because they take time out. If you get a fire in production, you cannot produce for a couple of weeks. If you get a fire in delivery in the warehouse and you can't make a delivery, that's going to cost you a lot of money. So fire stations, worth it. Maintenance, 15% less maintenance for all buildings. Only $2,000 a month, worth it. For the rest of it, construction department, if you build this early, you will save a fixed amount of money on all your buildings. It'll end up being a couple of million you'll probably save, because you'll be building a lot. But at the beginning of the game, and it's going to cost you $3,500 a month. So, and once you build the buildings, you pretty much you want to destroy the construction department, because you're not saving any money. Then you're just paying maintenance. Is it worth putting up for the first couple of years, saving the money and then destroying? Maybe. If you're not going to build the other things, then you can go for this. But for me, I don't want to go broke, so I'm not going to build it in the first year. And then I'm going to build quite a number of other buildings that I want straight up at the beginning. So this isn't going to save money for my research buildings. I don't want to wait to put my research buildings up. So that's 20% of all the buildings I'm going to build are my research buildings. I'm not going to get a discount on those. I'm going to build some buildings in the factory as well that I want to have from the get-go. So I'm not going to save 20%. I could build this and then wait and then build those things. but I don't want to wait 40 days for this to get put up. That's 40 days less on research that I have, 40 days less on production that I have. So I tend not to build that. I could see the argument for building it, but I don't think it's worth it. The lobbying office is not worth building at all, because mainly just because influence isn't a factor in the game yet. It's a feature that has been left to the side. I believe in, as the game progresses, influence is going to have an effect on your ability to receive contracts from other countries, but at the moment there's zero chance of that being used, and you can't earn prestige with other countries, so no point having that. The admin council is a very good building, so this is worth building. Maybe not at the beginning of the game, maybe just save your money and then spend it once you get a couple of administrators, but it gives you a 25% bonus to the administrators' perks. The first administrator you get, which we will get quite early in the game, gives us a 25% bonus to production. So a 25% bonus to 25% is going to be a 6.25% bonus to production for 2,000 a month, and that's just for one administrator. This is worth it. But I tend not to build that until after my first or second contract is in and I have some cash flow coming. So with that will do it for administration at the beginning. And with the factory, there's two buildings we want at the beginning. If you like to have maximum production up and running at the beginning, then sub-assembly line is the best building in production. It gives you a 15% across the bonus reduction in man-hour cost of your tanks, which is 15% quicker production of your tanks, which means your tank contracts will be finished 15% sooner and you can charge more money for your tanks. So that makes sense. The other thing that you want to build, this can be built after the first contract or two, or if you just want the flexibility to go to maximum production. We're not going to have the workers to fill this until 2 or 3 months into the game. So holding off building this is an option. But this is 100 extra workers. This is essentially, you have 300 workers to begin with, so this is an extra 33% production that's available to you. That's a no-brainer. That's worth building. The rest of these buildings, as you'll see, riveting hall, rifling hall, milling hall. The riveting hall is pretty good to start with because that pretty much affects everything. But if we quickly go to research, we can see on things that we build, or research rather, what affects them. So once we get female sponson, we can see that the required machinery is riveting. So if we have a riveting machine in the factory, whenever we're making female sponsons, that'll affect that. Rhomboidal hull, riveting. So riveting's a good building to begin with. Riveting's also involved in making the whippet. The Hornet, we've got riveting and rolling. So there's no point for any buildings apart from riveting really at the beginning. You could get rolling or cutting or any of those. Oh, sorry, went into the wrong menu. Or any of those, but they're not really going to affect our initial tanks. That's better. They're not really going to affect our initial tanks. Recycling line, reducing resources in the event of a production halt. So that is when production is halted due to an accident or things like that. I find that's a marginal building at best. You're going for fires and accidents, and you can go through a game and not have a single fire. That said, I've been through games where I've had 2 fires every year for 5 years in a row, and it's been awful, but the chances of that happening are very, very, very low. I've also had games where I haven't had a single fire, so it's all random luck. I don't think I'm a big believer in insurance, but this insurance is such a small chance of becoming profitable for you, especially when it's costing you $2,000 a month to keep this building. It's just not worth it. You're better off going for a riveting hall and one of the other halls, and that is production at the beginning. Those are the only two buildings, I think, subassembly and workers, and you will have a very strong production line for a long time into the future. The warehouse, again, is a building that has some good buildings in it, but they're not really necessary for the beginning of the game. The tank depot is great. I like pre-building tanks. Pre-building tanks means that if you've got a fair idea that you're going to be able to win contracts with a certain tank design, you build the tanks before the contract comes in, which would never happen in real life. It's a gamification, a tycoonification, if you will, of the tycoon type series. You would never build tanks in real life without having a contract to fulfill them for, but if you do it in the game, you can bargain with the delivery time of tanks, and that's very powerful in making more money. You can make a lot more money if you don't have to worry too much about delivery time, and you can turn the contract around very quickly and deliver the tanks to them. So if you've got 20 or 30 tanks in your tank depot, and later in the game you might want 20 or 30 heavy tanks, 20 or 30 female tanks, 20 or 30 medium tanks. This is a great building, but it doesn't need building at the beginning. 50 tanks is enough for your first few years, but I would be building this after the first year or the second year. Unloading speed stations give you a 25% reduction in resource delivery time. This is a good building if you find that you forget to order in enough resources most of the time, and that would be me a lot of the time. I usually build this building, so I mainly aim not so much at safety of deliveries, although that is something you can aim for. So loading safety stations, which is 10% more reliability on your delivery of tanks here. Safety is one of those things, 10% extra. It depends where you're ordering your resources from. I'm ordering from Africa most of the time because that's the cheapest place to order your resources from. Where you order your resources matters. So if we go down to Africa, it's got low reliability. I don't think 10% is really going to increase that well. So every time I order from Africa, I assume the goods are going to be late, and I build that into my calculation. And if I need something quicker or safer, I tend to go with North America, which is a long time to be delivered, but it's got a high delivery reliability with a low, only a 2-day extension. So I know I'm getting the goods in 29 days. Africa, I know I'm getting the goods in 27 days, but the quantity is a lot less. I pay top dollar if I want goods in 10 days. So as I said, it depends on how good you are at keeping your warehouse stocked and whether you remember to keep on ordering in goods. I tend to go for speed stations and delivery speed because getting my tanks delivered quickly, 15% quicker, means I can get a lot more money for my tanks because I can deliver them quicker. I tend not to go for the safety because with my luck, things are always late, whether it's delivering or whether it's receiving. And if I don't assume that I'm going to be late with my delivery or late with getting the goods in, then the penalties for not delivering on a contract are just too great to not take that into calculation. So I don't worry too much about safety stations. If you like to play the game risky, you might be somebody that likes safety stations because it lowers that risk. But I choose to just go with the 100% of always factoring in the length of time it's going to take. So bonus to raw resources sold by the player. I mean, this could be a useful building, but again, the money you're going to save is going to get eaten up by maintenance costs. You should, after the first few contracts, you should never be in a financial position where you are going to be selling your resources. You shouldn't be buying that many resources to send yourself broke that you have to sell them. Prevention is better than cure in the case of the supply depot. Same with the scrap depot. You're better off selling your tanks to a contract for a reduced rate than scrapping them. Scrapping them, you get 50% of the resources back. This way, you get an extra 30%, so you get 80% of the resources back. I still, if you're storing a lot of tanks and you're upgrading your tank designs very quickly, this might be useful. But because you're paying maintenance on it, and because with a bit of forethought, you should never be scrapping your tanks, and because you've already invested the labor and the production and the time into building those tanks, you're better off selling them. And I haven't found really got tanks of a design so far behind that I haven't been able to reduce the price, and because they're in storage, you're gonna have a competitive contract because you're gonna be delivering them straight away. So a scrap depot is not really worth it either. So I would be going for tank depot, unloading speed stations, loading speed stations, and if I can remember the one that gives us, I think it's naval freight, yes. So this gives us reduction of tank delivery time of 15% and reduction of resources delivery time of 15%. This is worth it. It's very expensive in terms of maintenance. So you're paying $6,000 a month for these better time frames. But for me, the ability to satisfy many contracts slightly better is worth that cost. Especially when you hit about 1917. For the first year or two, having this is not going to be massive, but towards the end of not the end of the game, you generally hit peak contracts around 1917 to 1918, where everybody's buying tanks. The attrition on tanks in this game is not very high at the moment. So once you sell tanks to a battalion in Arms Tank Tycoon at the moment, those tanks are likely not to be destroyed in combat unless they come up against other tanks. The infantry and artillery battalions really haven't had much success in destroying tanks in any of my games. The tanks have proved to, when they are damaged, be repaired quite easily. Most of the games, the attrition on the tanks has been minimal from deployment and from maintenance issues. So 99% of your contracts are going to be supplying a new battalion with tanks. As you get into the mid-1920s, those contracts slow right down because everybody is full to the brim with tanks and there's no more military contracts to be had. But 1917 to 1918 is the peak time for contracts. So this is when you want all your buildings up. This is when you want maximum production, is 1917 to 1918. And finally, the Design Bureau. I would not build anything here to begin with. The Ergonomics Office would be a good office if you ever really needed more people. Tank designs take quite a while, 30 odd days, but there's really, once you get a few designs up at the beginning of the game, you've always got something to fall back on. So paying that extra $5,000 a month to get a few days off your tank designs isn't really worth it. You don't really need to break through the designs for 5%. That's 1 in 20 designs. That's probably all the designs you're going to make in a single game. So at this stage of development of the game, there's not enough options here. Most of the time your design bureau is not working. So you design new tanks, then you wait for more tech and you wait for you to capture other tanks, and then you spend 30 days designing another tank, and then 3 or 4 months your design bureau won't be doing any work. It's not at the point where you need to build any buildings. The buildings worth building are things like the optimization department, where the resource costs of design tanks are 5% less. And then there's the localization department. The man-hour cost of a design tank are 5% less. When you take the maintenance cost, so this is costing you $5,000 a month, you need to calculate how many tanks you're building a year and what that 5% really represents. Because if you're not making 60,000 gold or pounds in the maintenance cost from that 5% reduction in man hours, so that's slightly faster production of tanks, then it's not worth it. I would say this building's worth it for just a few years, 1917 to maybe 1919, 1920 at the outside, when you're getting a lot of contracts in. And then the contracts start to slow down and you're not making enough tanks to make the maintenance cost of these buildings worth it. So you've got the optimization department, the localization gives you this one's localization's 5% off man hours, optimization 5% off resources. You got the functionality, which is a combination of the two. I'll just remind myself what compliance is. Yeah, the defect, 5% reduction in defect severity is not worth 3,500 maintenance per month. The slight increase in stats you're going to get is never going to cover the cost. So you've got those three buildings are worth it, and design department is 5% reduction of tank design process time. I've already talked about that. This building's not going to be working for much of the time. You don't need that extra 5%. So that's my thoughts on the design bureau. Engineering bureau is a little similar to the design bureau. You might see that it's worth building the ergonomics office at some stage, just because when you're at peak technology and peak reverse engineering, you are spending a lot of time updating maybe 5 to 8 of your frontline tank designs. So you're upgrading engines, you're upgrading tracks, and every time you discover a new tracks, you want to upgrade all of your tracks. So the engineering department has a lot of downtime in the first 2 to 3 years, but then the time when you're busy again, 1917 to about 1918, when you're finishing up your tech, you've got a number of enemy tanks that you're reverse engineering, and you've got quite a few various parts for various tank designs that you need to keep up to date. You can do with a bit better throughput in this office, but for the majority of the game, you're not going to need that throughput. And so the ergonomics office is of limited use. I wouldn't build it straight away. Breakthrough bureau, that 5% chance of something happening straight away is not worth the maintenance cost. I mean, you could look into no. The engineering's got that much downtime that you don't need to speed things up. I mean, you could, if you're swimming in money and you don't mind paying the maintenance, you might want to speed things up to make you more responsive to the market. But that would have to be done on a case-by-case basis for each game. I haven't found much use for speeding up engineering. It's hasn't, in terms of money, as in money in to money out, I don't think the money in covers the maintenance cost of these buildings. The maintenance cost gets debilitating once you fully, if you go to fully build up every department that you have. The ergonomics building is enough to increase by 50% the throughput of your engineering building, and I didn't see any need. And I mean, you only need that when you're extremely busy. For most of the time, you have got plenty of time to engineer your parts. So that's where I'd go with those buildings. Now, we're at the beginning of the game right now. So if we look at our research options, we'll start off by researching the female Mark 1. This is a very strong start tech for you. The female Mark 1, you get male sponsons and female sponsons on your Mark 1, Mark 5 and Mark 8 tanks. And they hold the majority of your weapons. You can have the females hold machine guns and the males hold large guns. Now, when they calculate the heart attack effectiveness of your tank, although, hold on, I'm sorry, I've got myself a bit tangled. We'll talk about tech first. Female sponson is a very good, very strong initial tech. Solid shot rounds, very strong tech. They basically add heart attack, add a bunch of heart attack to your tank. So having solid shot rounds, having a female sponson, are very strong. Mobility, this has changed a bit in the last patch. So high pass running gear used to be 5 mechanics, and the Warhorse used to be 1 mechanic. That must have been a mistake. They've popped this up to 5 again now. We can see that needs cutting focus as well. So this doesn't really have a massive effect that it used to, but it does increase weight limit, and it does increase reliability and repairability. And I believe it's repairability you want in your first contract. So this is a good tech, but not a great tech. I would go the female sponson first and the AP ammo before high pass running gear. The high pass running gear also improves mobility as well as improving weight, and the twin engine comes in at 130 points as a conglomerate of stats compared to your current engine, which is 75 points. So that's a bigger mobility boost as well, and increases reliability and repairability. These are good techs, but not great techs. You don't need low pass running gear until you have a whippet hull. So we can comfortably ignore that for now. And when we go to firepower, as I said, AP solid shot rounds, you don't need to design anything. It's a straight up kinetic penetration additive for your tank, and that goes into your heart attack value, and so that's just a straight bonus to the score of your tank. And same with tracer munitions are good, and the 1909 machine gun is about a 25% increase in your machine gun over your Lewis gun. So AP ammo, tracer ammo are both very good, and light machine gun is fairly decent. It's a fairly decent upgrade, but I would put the light side machine gun after your twin engine and your track improvement, because as percentage improvements, they give you a greater boost to score. Now, if we go to the tank design and we design our first tank, so we create the Mark 1, and the only option we've got at the start of the game is the male sponsons. Now, if we go back, this has 2 cannons. And so you would think, oh, that's great. I have twice the heart attack than if I had 1 cannon. You would think that's how it works, but that's not how it works. This tank is essentially cheaper than the other tank I just had with 2 cannons on it, but will score about the same. It'll have slightly less score because the sponson adds on more crew room for 1 extra crew member, but you've got 1 less gunner and half the loaders required and a slightly less mechanics. So why does it not count the 2 guns? Don't know. No idea. You would think that having 2 big 6-pounders would be twice as good as having 1, But no, it's exactly the same. So there is no benefit. So what we want to do is get that female sponson on, and then we have 3 machine guns. But I hear you say, well, they haven't included 2 guns. When you have 2, they only take the best guns hard attack to create hard attack. So when they're creating soft attack from the machine guns, surely they just take the one best machine gun. No, they will be the machine guns will be additive. So you'll have 3 machine guns and you'll get full value for all 3 machine guns. So the best initial tank you can make with the initial parts is one with a female sponson on the other side. Except that's not an initial part, and that's why that's our first research. That'll add about 30 points to our initial tank design for the cost of 1 research. And if we get the tracks and engine and AP ammo on the tank before the first contract comes in, we will easily win that first contract. So if we move ahead in time a little bit, we will be able to examine that. To illustrate, we've now got our first contract, and I've gone ahead and designed 2 exact tanks. So this one has 2 male sponsons, 2 quarter 6-pounders. This one's got a male and a female sponson and 1 less crew member. So as you can see, the tank's already better because it's got less defects. It's got less crew performance defects and less volume limit defects on the tank, just from the fact that we've saved a crew member. So we're no longer -1 there. We've no longer lost our crew communications. You've got to remember, when we fix these defects, I haven't bothered fixing them on either tank here to show this point. We can't fix them completely. We can only partially fix them. So when dealing with the amount of crew in a tank, the amount of volume and the amount of mass, true, you need to use your limitations up to where you can, but where you can avoid the defects, it's good not to, because this tank, even though it's exactly the same tank, just that volume and that 1 crew member makes a difference to volume, makes a difference to mass, although it's not enough to do another pip, so that won't affect the tank. But in the case of volume and crew, it's enough to put them into the red, which means more defects, which means less stats, which means lower score. Now if we take these 2 tanks, which the only difference is the male and female, and we have a look at the heart attack of the Mark 1, which has 2 cannons, it has a heart attack of 161. Now if we have a look at the Mark 1 that has 1 cannon, it has a heart attack as well of 161. So here's our first hint. When we're making the Mark series of tanks, whether it's Mark 1s, Mark 5s or Mark 8s, there's no point having 2 cannons on it, except in combat on the world map. They will do better against hard targets. That is true. But in terms of a mogul of tank design where you're looking to make money, we are spending money on that second cannon for no appreciable result, whereas the soft power of the Mark 1, 119, the male version, 97. So we've increased our soft power by 22, which is an appreciable points difference towards our success score. And if we look at how success score, 31 points for the male, and for the female, better success score, 53 points. So we've almost doubled our points from soft firepower. Well, 2/3, improved it by 2/3 for spending less money and having less crew members. So we've also got better crew performance than the male tank. So always make hermaphrodite tanks is basically the takeaway from here, and you will get better success scores on your tanks. Of course, this isn't true with turreted tanks like the FT-17 or the LK2. They've only got the single gun anyway. It's not going to make a difference. I mean, they've only got the single hard attack gun, and then only if you put the FT turret on the LK. But I digress. Now, the other point is we currently have 16 tanks in reserve. But that's because I forgot to, at the start of the game, start making Mark 1, Mark 1. So I'm making Mark 1, Mark 1s. We've got 16 in reserve. We're on our way to making 20. So 20 tanks there. Now, if we look at our delivery, so who do we want to deliver with? So we could go high speed delivery. That'll do 20 of them. Delivery speed 3 days. We haven't signed the contract yet. So we can deliver these quite quickly. But say if we wanted to make a medium delivery, 2 days, we'll give ourselves 2 weeks to deliver the tanks by. So we'll go back to the contract. We'll pretend for a second that we've got, so it's the 29th of the 9th, so we'll be able to, let's give ourselves to the 14th of October. So we can't even, there we go, 14th of October. That'll give us just over 2 weeks to deliver the tanks. But it's going to take them about 3 days to accept the contract. So let's stretch it out to the 21st. Give ourselves 3 weeks. Our score, that was 327, is now, just with having pre-built tanks, 641. This is how you make money. So we would have had to have asked for less than 27,000 with the original delivery date. So we can now, if we suppose that we know the competition, we could spend 81,000, but we've got a fairly good idea from playing the game before. You might want to spend the 81,000, but remember that's going to be the profit margin of, I mean, if it takes us about 17,000, let's estimate, to build the tanks, that's the profit of, say, 7 or 8 tanks to buy the price. We know that at maximum on medium difficulty, the hectare, just from experience, is going to be about a maximum score of about 415. So as long as we handily beat 415, we'll be able to win the contract. So we've gone from 27,000 per tank, where we would have lost the contract, to now let's just make it around 33,000. I mean, that's easily going to win the contract. 437 should win the contract. So, and by the 21st, would be able to deliver that if we had the 20 tanks in storage, which we don't at the moment. But let's say this shouldn't affect the. I'll just go to 16 tanks. That's what I've got in storage. Let's take the risk. I can make 33,682 on the tank. If I didn't have those tanks pre-built, to win the contract with the, oh no, it was the mail tank. To win the contract, I would need to sell those tanks. 430 is about the success score we had. Or 422 will win the contract. 19,791. So that's the price difference between 19,000, which is barely a profit, and once we factor wages into it, probably not a profit at all, and maintenance of buildings, probably not a profit. But having those tanks pre-built and the delivery date down to the 21st, 16 of them, we can do 33,000. It's also handy that we can make more than 33,000. 33,500, which is a healthy profit margin. And that's what we're looking for in the first contract. This is the most important contract. So if we went for the female tank, which is a better tank, and we just started producing it now because this is the point that we have the tech, although we've got a lot more tech. If we were to design a tank now, it would have AP ammo. We've got the machine guns researched by this stage. We've got the tracks, and we don't have an engine at the moment, but we've got a number of those initial researches saved. So our design for our second tank is going to be a lot better than this tank, But if we went for, say, we just did the female attachment and then redesigned the tank, and we had to give ourselves a reasonable time to, say, December, 20th of December to produce them by, again, we're not making any real profit. We're barely scraping even. So we'll be able to get just over 20,000 for it. It's I mean, these tanks cost 16, 17,000, depending where you're getting all your materials from to build the tanks. They're kind of free because we start with 85 tons of material already in storage when we start the game, so we haven't had to spend any buying material. But depending on when you're getting your material in from is going to depend on your approximate cost. This is making a small profit margin. We want to make around double what our tanks are worth. So we want to build our tanks before the contract comes in, and that takes tanks in storage. So we want to, longer term, we want a storage building to store our tanks in, because the amount of money we can make from building them before the contract hits is just worth it. It's so worth it. So I'll go back and we shall complete this contract just to show that it's quite easy to do. So that's 21st of October, 3 weeks to do it. That's plenty of time. Submit the contract. We'll just cut away. We'll come back when the contract's accepted. So contract's accepted. We can go to shipment. We can ship the Mark 1 off. That's going to be there by the 14th of October. Even if it's delayed, it's going to be there by the 19th. We've given ourselves to the 21st. So we get our price per unit down to 1,000. We don't have to use the high priority delivery speeds for the low delivery speeds. We can use the slower one of Weckerton and Sons. We'll send them 16, which was the agreed upon amount. Sign that off and we'll cut away again. And as you can see, we still have 450,000 in the bank. Oh, fire stations are complete. Our production's complete. Ergonomic. I built all these buildings a bit later this time. Is our buildings all coming? Contract number 1 complete. We've only sold 16 tanks. If we'd started producing them as soon as we did that first design, we would have sold them 30 tanks. So we would have doubled our profit. We made a profit of 480,000 in cash, which is going to be enough to get us through to the second contract. And again, now we'll design another tank with our current technology. We'll start producing that. We'll try and have that production complete. The second tank will come in. We know, looking at Britain's the only one ordering tanks at the moment, only one with the tank core. We could go around and look at each of the countries, and you can see as Britain announces another regiment, we'll get a blank regiment here. They're only hiring Vanguard tanks, which we know is hard attack. We know that's reliability now, and we know that that is protection. So we can hone our research as we want. So we might want to think about RHA steel coming up. That will increase our protection. We want to finish off the firepower. Tracer munitions and HE ammo are very good. Finish off the engine, and we've got a very good start to the game. Very good start. As you can see, your cash issues disappear when you start to pre-build tanks, and it's pretty much the way that you have to go to stay ahead in this game. And also not building too many buildings at the start of the game. I've still built a number of buildings, as you can see. I've got a full set of research buildings. I've got production buildings. I've got the administration buildings for maintenance and fire. These are all adding maintenance costs. So our maintenance cost per month is 75,000. So we've only got enough money to last just over 10 months when you add in wages. But we still have the bank loan in our back pocket, which thankfully we now have a slider for, thanks to the patch yesterday. So that's a big relief, because before we had to do it 100 credits at a time, or 100 gold, 100 pounds at a time. So hopefully that helps you guys with the start to the game on which technologies to aim for, how to design your tanks, or some ideas behind the design of your tanks, and which buildings are worth building and which buildings aren't worth it. And something to remember as well is the ebb and flow of the game on the contracts that you're getting in. Some of the buildings that are worth it in 1917, 1918, such as the design buildings, when you're getting a lot of contracts in, you've got very high production of tanks. They slow down in the 1920s. So there's nothing, if you're finding a building isn't doing the job for you anymore, or you don't need it anymore, say if you found that you finished all your research in the game. Well, if you've finished all the research, there's no point for any of these buildings. Just demolish them. Demolish them and save yourself a lot in maintenance costs, because the maintenance in this game can be huge. I mean, let's just, if you look at the administration here, 5,000 for administration just as a base maintenance cost, then 5,000 for the fire station, then 2,000 for the maintenance office, and then we get the 15% discount on top of that. But when you have 4 buildings in every sector of your base, the maintenance costs are massive. And that's something you need to come to terms with, is demolishing buildings, because otherwise in the 1920s is your other time you're going to go bankrupt. Your 2 hardest periods of the game are the initial period, when you don't know when that first contract's going to come in. You want to build the buildings you need, which are research and production. You don't, and fire and maintenance. But the other buildings are luxuries. They're nice to have, but not at the risk of putting you into bankruptcy. I would say after I get my second contract, I will build a tank depot. I will build a naval freight depot. But for the first 1 to 2, maybe 3 contracts, until I got that money coming in and I have a couple of million in the bank, it's not worth buying any of those. So early game, just go for the research, go for production, and leave everything else. At peak production, you can look at your design bureaus when you're getting out your best designs, and you've got a number of chassis to make designs for. But your first tanks, the designs are not worth the maintenance cost that you're going to be paying for, because for the first 2 designs you make, you're going to be paying 12 months worth of maintenance cost. And to get the most out of the design buildings, you'd need all 3 design buildings. So they're just temporary buildings to have, say, 1917 to 1918, 1919. Depends when you finish designing your tanks, because for most of the 1920s, you'll have all the technologies that you're going to get, and you won't need to redesign and upgrade your designs as you will through the World War I era, because that's the only technology in tanks we have at the moment. So I hope this little guide helps you guys out, and take care. Enjoy the game. Bye.